Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, Robert Lee, PhD, is a focusing innovator. He's an international leader in developing focusing trainers. He led the advanced certification week-long at the Focusing Institute in New York for 7 years. A licensed psychologist, Lee has developed a new model for teaching focusing called domain focusing, and he has developed a theory and practice for overcoming stubborn problems, changing the unchangeable through domain focusing, also known as macroshifting. He has developed a comprehensive practice for working with difficulties in felt sense formation, elusive felt sensing. In psychotherapy, he's developed special methods for using focusing with anxiety and depression, and with couple and group psychotherapy. I'm just wanting to sort of loop back for a moment because I really would like you to sort of create the image or the picture of the chairs in a domain focusing session, and that how you physically change chairs and what they represent, just so people are sort of clear that in a domain focusing situation, there is a physical movement of chairs where you will actually change where you're seated and change your perspective. But could you just explain how that plays out?
Yeah. So I had 3 domains for many years: thinking, felt sensing, self-empathy. I have 4 domains now. I added the body just for this kind of physicality of our body. So I'll talk about the 3 domains because I did that for 12 years and hundreds of times, and the 4 domains is I've only been formally doing the chairs for a few years, and so but basically I start out, the person starts talking about a problem. Maybe they feel lonely and they don't have love in their life at the moment. And they tell a story about it, and the stories are important to me. They give the context that they're coming from. And then at some point I think, oh, yeah, but this story's gone on for 5 or 10 minutes, and I do have lots of useful information. This person had a lover 5 years ago, and it was perfect, and then something happened, and now there's a lot of aloneness and grief, and right in there somewhere, I, as the guide, am holding this knowledge that story and thinking and context are very important for defining the situation, but they shouldn't absorb all of the time of your work. They really should be more like a third, maybe 40% of the time, usually, sometimes more, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so right there, I would reflect, oh, you had this really nice love relationship. I would just stay with them, and now there's grief. And right there, I would stand, and it's almost a dance, or an acting. I would stand and say, as you hold that grief and that memory of how good it was, I would probably keep those together. And then I would sit in the middle chair, the felt sense chair, and say, and what's it like in your body now? And I have about 7 ways, I have many ways of asking that question. What is your body sense? What is your experiencing? What is your felt sensation? They're just lots of, or what comes as you hold that, or inside, or where does it register? There are many variations that are quite important. I'm looking for the variation that feels right when I say it. So, but I say, okay, grief and memory of that wonderful love, and how is it inside now? And with the now, I'm sitting down in that middle chair, the felt sense chair. And the reason I developed this is I wanted to be cueing the focuser about how I was tracking them in terms of domains, and also to be moving to another domain. But I didn't want the cueing to completely interrupt them. So by moving in this visual way, they're still mostly listening to me in their auditorially, but they see me moving and they get a cue on a different level. And that some people close their eyes during all of this, but they tell me afterwards they hear my voice moving to another location, so they know there's a domain change going on. But this different level of cueing them really seems to be quite helpful. And I often have the other 2 people, one is on each kind of wing. So I have 3 chairs, and facing me is the client, and then on each side there's a little further out on these wings are the witnesses. And I find that witnesses are unusually empathic in this process. If you teach a group of 10 people, someone will be a little bit unempathic sometimes, and you have to kind of manage the group a little bit. But in these 3-person groups where there's lots of direct work, I find people are very empathic, partly because they know it's going to be their turn next.
Right.
Something, but so they're really holding the process with me in a very important way as well.
Yeah, you can, as you describe that, you can really sort of feel the, it feels like a kind of a, like an embrace, but if my arms were 2 times longer than normal. So it's like an extension of a very comfortable kind of, I won't call it a campfire, but it's like, it feels like something like just being supported. Like I was, as you were saying that, imagining myself in the focuser's position. I'd probably have my eyes closed, but feeling that human support, the energy of those people around you, feels like a very sort of supported and a very safe process. And I could see how the empathy would deepen in that situation, knowing that you'd be changing chairs at some point in this process. So there's a real giving there. I have a quote that I pulled up from your website that I'd like to read. And I guess what I'm asking is, as I read this quote, I would just ask you to sort of take it in today. And then maybe if there's something that comes, I'd love to hear your sentiments or thoughts or feelings. But here's the quote. The practice of focusing, that is, of listening carefully to your body felt sense of a situation, happens mostly in two contexts. One is with yourself, which you can use anytime, formally or informally, in a session of 5 seconds or 2 hours. The other is a planned egalitarian partnership session where the listening carefully is doubled with exponential results. In this partnership, you listen carefully to your body felt sense of a situation while your partner listens carefully to you, and then vice versa. The benefits of this doubled listening are extraordinary and wide-ranging, yet there continues to be a humble ordinariness about the whole thing, like of course this is the way human beings should be able to help each other.
I'm really moved by that. My first thought, it must have been written by someone else. It's way too lovely for me or something, but I do recognize it also. So it just I think this gift of partnership and the gift of focusing on your own for 5 seconds or much longer, 2 hours, is they kind of are partners. Okay, so this is another, so the what you can do on your own is one kind. I shouldn't call them partners, they're colleagues or something, or they're two sides of a process. So in that goes on, and the people that just take focusing in just begin doing that kind of, wow, I can do it here, I can do it there, I can do it on the train, I can do it in the shower, it's just wherever. And then this very special doubled listening where you're I define focusing there as this listening to yourself in the body about a situation. And then you get this doubled listening where the listener, their only concern is how to hold your process. And that really is rather remarkable. And fruitful.
Yeah.
And so, well, maybe I should Well, it's almost too sacred for this move, but I'm going to make the move anyway. Uh, so some of the several of my New York graduates of my training programs, I did training programs for several years in a row, starting one every year, and they were about 2.5 years long. But several people would tell me, oh, yes, they took my recommendation at the end of the program. They found someone to be an ongoing partner, not just the practice partner for 8 weeks. And then they would tell me what they had never told me before, that they had been in therapy for a long time, maybe 10 years or 15 years. These were usually therapists. And, just if you're a non-therapist, you get shocked by this, but you think, if you're a non-therapist, you think, well, 1 or 2 years is pretty long. But if you're a therapist, 15 years, 20 years, that's just what lots of therapists do. So it's just therapists, okay? But anyway, they had done a therapy for a long time, and they started tracking their partnership session and their therapy session each week and just comparing, are they about the same? Is one a little better than the other? Is one a lot better than the other? And then they kept this journal for quite a while, maybe a year, maybe longer. And they looked back over it and just like a researcher, and they would say, usually the focusing exchange, or their half of the focusing, but in a way there's a whole process of an exchange also, is equal or better to the therapy session. And they did not want, these were experienced psychotherapists, they did not want to stop their therapy. They really understood the functioning, the long-term thing, the deep reparenting and stuff that's going on. But they sat there and said, I can't justify this expense to my family or my professional expenses if over a year, the partnership is often equal or better. And they stopped their therapy reluctantly. And I heard almost this same story from at least 3 or 4, maybe 7 or 8 therapists who are real experts in growth. They've usually tried many things. And so I really think that if we really develop very strong partnership, I don't mean just any kind of partnership, but if we really keep growing in focusing and listening, that it can, the partnership can begin to function as a substitute for psychotherapy, but with a couple of exceptions. And those are that every now and then when you're doing egalitarian work, you might sabotage yourself, or you might ignore some safety consideration, or you might not pay enough attention to integrity, because focusing is egalitarian. So it's not like therapy where one person is the expert, so you don't just say, oh, you should do this or that in partnership. I teach people to avoid that kind of thing. But there is, it doesn't come up often in therapy. I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist. So it doesn't come up often, these places where you say, that's a terrible idea, maybe once in 4 years or something, but it's really important when it does come up. And so in the macro year, we're trying to really be equal to or better than really good individual psychotherapy, a little faster. And we're doing it by utilizing focusing partnership for a large share of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And then these monthly sessions are trying to both make key movements, key breakthroughs, but also key adjustments, or to stop a self-sabotage, to be careful with safety, something like that is in there. So it's really been kind of an exciting process to develop this macro year as a new kind of psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it has to have strong partnership in it.
Mm-hmm.
I created domain focusing, so I really like things that domain focusing can do. But really, there are strong focusing partners that are not in domain focusing. It's out there, but how we create real exceptional strength and focusing partnership is really it's really an important issue in the focusing world, and it's essential to macro shifting and the macro year and all of that stuff.
Could you talk about what you think can be a new model for psychotherapy and how it involves the process you've developed?
I want to say two things. In macro shifting, in changing the unchangeable, we're trying to make it possible to do things that couldn't be changed. And it's not just in mental health or physical health or community building, but it's also socially. We look at the world, we look at our societies and say, well, yeah, all the politicians are rich, or most of them. Is this what we want?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot, and usually we just say, well, but I can't change that, but I can't change that, but I can't change that, And macro shifting wants to make what we could imagine realistically changing be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts on this individual, personal. So I see it not just as a personal growth method, but also as something leading the social change. Right now, it feels like if I dedicated myself to eliminating prejudice and racism, I wouldn't get anywhere. It would be meaningful, and maybe you get a little bit of somewhere, but it feels impossible,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, or almost impossible. But in macro shifting, because people change things that have seemed unchangeable, it implies that they can look more broadly and take on issues that seemingly seemed impossible to get involved with. So that's one kind of relevance to social change from macroshifting. The other relevance to social change is that it's kind of related to a theory I have that when I was early in my psychologist career, the stigma of psychotherapy was just starting to go down broadly in the U.S. Actually, I was in Massachusetts, so Massachusetts is very educated and progressive generally, not always. And just people from all walks of life, from just, were just into psychotherapy and how it could change, and the systems, the health insurance and stuff were just such that people could find a way. People making $10 an hour would find a way to sustain therapy for quite a while. And when I came back from being in Costa Rica for 12 years, a lot of this process had already been challenged, but it had gone much further, and it was just shocking to me how difficult it was for people with lesser means, or anyone without very high income would have difficulty getting access to the really good therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started talking to people around the world, and it would happen in different ways, but basically social systems around the world would also see that the stigma would go down, psychotherapy would go up, but then there was like this cost control issue, because it's not so simple ahead of time to say who's going to benefit a lot from psychotherapy. If someone comes in and then they don't become the therapist that kills 50 people, the terrorist, not the therapist. The
Right.
terrorist. That's a funny slip. That's an incredible benefit to society, but no one can measure it, because no one knows that it prevented that terrorism from happening or something, or so in fact, in every country, the stigma comes down and there's a broadening of psychotherapy, but then at some point there is this tightening and restricting, and good therapy begins to be the province of only the very wealthy.
Right.
And that really bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
And so macrotherapy is a way to it's a way to architecturally innovate such that you're having as powerful a therapy as good individual weekly psychotherapy, or even better, even faster, but at a significantly lower cost. But we're not trying to do straight out miracles. People used to come to my 4-day retreats and they wanted to change an unchangeable in 4 days. And I would say, you shouldn't come with that expectation. It might happen in 1 out of 1,000 or something like that, but that isn't what is typical. It's a beginning to hard work. So in this kind of architecture of where I have people do a 4-day retreat, and I have them do monthly 3-person, 3-hour sessions, and I have them do strong partnership weekly, and I have them do a changes group in a larger group of people doing this once a month for like an hour, and then to do the partnership piece after that. That's another aspect. But I'm trying to create something that is going to be broadening access to this deep therapy work, and also really addressing the problem with macros generally, that even in psychotherapy, it's hard to be predictable in a good way with the change. If someone comes in to psychotherapy and you say 5 years, well, it might take 10 years, or you might do 10 years and you get lots of change, but you wanted to find a life partner and you didn't. That kind of thing happens. So we want this kind of predictability with macro work. Psychotherapy is pretty predictable with micro work. So, though it's also still expensive. But so macro shifting is especially wanting to make this kind of deep psychotherapy work available, predictable, and timely, that it doesn't take forever.
Yeah.
And so it's really in the early stages. It will need to be researched. This is all stuff that I've put together from 25 years of doing these retreats. But to become a psychotherapy, it has to get this this direct evidence, formal research. So that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping for and working towards, and that I think could really open up the accessibility to psychotherapy in every country. A new model that's incorporating the miracle of focusing partnership, which focusers know, but also including this kind of retreat work, this 3-person, 3-hour work, the changes group work. And part of that comes from, in the training groups that I did, especially the therapist training groups, they would report at the end, we entered the program to strengthen our professional skills. And we got that, pretty well. It was a good, investment for improving our therapist skills. But what we really got and we didn't expect was this personal growth. Never did we dream we would get as much growth as we got. And my conclusion here is we need to build therapy processes that look like our training programs.
Right.
Okay, because the training programs are really delivering, the good ones, this very predictable growth. So it's, that structure, having an annual retreat, having these monthly 3-person, having the monthly changes, having weekly partnership is really like my training programs, and like many, there, it's a little different from other training programs, but pretty good training programs are like that, I would say.
What I like about what I hear in that structure is that it's not limited to one-on-one work. Like there's so many components. Like there's a one-on-one component, there's a 3 or 4 person component, there's a community component, and it changes. So it's integrating or replicating our day-to-day lives, where we spend some time alone, we spend some time with our intimates, and we spend some time out in the greater world. And just as you were describing that to me, it seems like the program sort of naturally considers that ground and addresses it in some way. So it sounds like very exciting future if we can develop, understand, research, and bring all of those wonderful qualities of focusing, of bringing ourselves to that process in a focusing way, to let it evolve into something that heals in an effective way and in an efficient way. Because really we want to spend time enjoying and living our lives in a physically healthy and mentally healthy way. Hopefully this is through focusing process, and this is one way to help people. Robert, I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, for sharing your work. I really appreciate what I've heard, what I've learned about domain focusing. And I just really would like to thank you for taking the time to share with me today.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you, David, and to have your empathic listening. It makes it very easy to talk. So thank you very much as well.
You've been listening to The Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm your host, David Battistella. Please visit our website at